Have you ever stared at a Greek paragraph and, perfectly parsed every single aorist and imperfect verb, nailed the vocabulary, mapped out the prepositional phrases, and then realized you have absolutely no idea what the theological heartbeat of the passage actually is?
Oh, yeah. You've basically isolated all the organs into neatly labeled jars. But, well, the patient is dead on the table.
Exactly. The patient is dead. And if you are a seminary student or a pastor or a biblical scholar joining us for this deep dive today, I know you know exactly the frustration I am talking about.
So, man.
Right. We treat the biblical text like a biological specimen to be dissected, rather than this living, breathing ecosystem of meaning.
It really is the great trap of introductory language classes.
Yeah.
We train students to use a microscope, right?
Yeah.
Focusing so intensely on the morphological tags of individual words, the tense, the voice, the mood. And they just forget to look up and see the entire architectural structure of the discourse. You have all the parts, but like you said, the life is gone.
And that is exactly the exegetical crisis we are tackling head-on today. So we are going to put down the microscope, step back, and look at the macro structure.
I love it.
Our mission for this deep dive is to move past word-level parsing and step into the world of advanced discourse analysis. And to do this, we are synthesizing two massive paradigm-shifting frameworks.
Huge frameworks.
Yeah. First, we are pulling from Systemic Functional Linguistics, SFL for short, specifically drawing from Chapter 9 of Halliday and Mattheson's seminal work on cohesion and discourse.
Right.
And second, we are taking that functional framework and pairing it with Constantine R. Campbell's model of verbal aspect. We are going to take all of this high-level linguistic theory and apply it directly to the Koine Greek of the New Testament.
Specifically, we'll be hyper-focusing on the Gospel of John and 1 John today.
Which is, that's an incredibly ambitious synthesis.
It is ambitious, yeah, but it's completely necessary. The goal today is to bridge this massive gap between abstract linguistic theory and the actual pulpit.
Yes, because pastors need this.
Exactly. We aren't just here to memorize what the grammar is in some theoretical vacuum. We are going to explore the cognitive and rhetorical reasons why the original author chose specific grammatical tools to shape meaning.
Right, like how does the linguistic architecture actually change the way we read and understand and ultimately preach the biblical text?
Because when we only look at words in isolation, we fundamentally misunderstand how human language functions.
Well, let's test that theory right out of the gate then. We need to start with the theoretical core of SFL.
Okay, let's do it.
In the Halliday and Mattheson text, they introduce a concept that, honestly, it completely redefines what a text actually is.
It really does.
Because we usually think of a text as a noun, right? A physical object,
Yeah.
a bound book on a desk. But they argue that a text is not a static object at all. It is a process of instantiation. It's an event. It's something that happens.
Yeah.
So walk me through the mechanics of that, because that is a massive cognitive shift for most of us.
It is a complete reorientation of how we view literature.
Mm-hmm.
Traditionally, especially in biblical studies, we view a text as a product, printed ink on a page, a finished artifact.
Right.
But Halliday and Mattheson argue that the organization of text is fundamentally semantic. It is a dynamic, ongoing process of meaning-making. And to understand this, we have to grasp their concept of the cline of instantiation.
The cline of instantiation.
Yeah. In linguistics, a cline is just a continuum. At one far end of this continuum, you have the entire linguistic system. In our case, the entire system of Koine Greek.
So the system includes, every single word in the lexicon, every grammatical rule, every possible syntactic combination, every idiom.
Right, all of it.
It's the absolute totality of the language's potential.
Correct. It is this vast reservoir of meaning potential. But you can't read a system, right? It's too massive. It's an abstraction.
Mm-hmm.
But a text like the Gospel of John is what happens when a speaker or writer begins making choices from that massive system to communicate in specific context.
Okay, I want to try an analogy here to ground this, because instantiation can feel a bit ethereal.
Go for it.
Think of the entire linguistic system of Koine Greek like a satellite view of the Earth on a digital map.
Okay, I like where this is going.
You are looking at the whole globe. You can see the oceans and continents. That is the system, all the potential roads you could travel. But a text is what happens when you drop that little street view icon down onto one specific intersection in one specific city.
Yes.
You are now on the ground, and you're constrained by the buildings and the flow of traffic. The system and the text are the exact same phenomenon, just viewed from wildly different distances along that continuum or cline.
That is a highly accurate way to visualize it. The text is the linguistic system instantiated. It is the system made actual in a specific instance.
Right.
And as a text unfolds clause by clause, sentence by sentence, it makes highly specific selections from that global system. It doesn't use every word or every rule.
No, it can't.
Right, so it selects a narrow band of vocabulary, a specific set of grammatical structures, and creates its own local microecosystem. Halliday and Matheson call this unfolding process logogenesis.
Logogenesis.
Yeah.
The genesis or birth of the discourse.
Exactly. Logogenesis is the creation of meaning in the course of the unfolding of a text. It's the time-bound, linear process where a text establishes favored patterns, motifs, and semantic phases.
It creates its own little world.
It creates what SFL calls an instantial system, and it accomplishes this world building by making continuous choices across three simultaneous dimensions of language. These are the famous three metafunctions of systemic functional linguistics.
Which are the experiential, the interpersonal, and the textual.
Right.
I really want to put these metafunctions under the microscope because this is where SFL stops being purely theoretical and becomes an intensely practical tool for exegesis. We need to spend some real time on each of these because according to Halliday, every single clause we speak, write, or read in the Greek New Testament is operating on these three tracks simultaneously. It's like a three-dimensional chessboard.
It is.
So let's start with the experiential metafunction. What is happening cognitively and grammatically here?
Well, the experiential metafunction is how language maps human experience. It is our cognitive interface with reality. When an author constructs a clause, they have to decide how to represent the world.
Okay.
This boils down to process types. Is the clause describing a material action, a relational state of being, a mental perception, or a verbal locution? The experiential track answers the fundamental questions: what is happening in the world of the text and who is doing what to whom?
So let's apply that to the text. If I read the shortest verse in the Greek New Testament, Jesus wept, that is an experiential choice.
Yes, exactly.
It is a behavioral or physiological process. It maps a physical reality.
Yes, and consider how that differs from a relational clause. If the text says God is light, there is no material action happening there.
Right. Nobody is doing anything physically.
It is an experiential mapping of an ontological reality.
Yeah.
It connects a participant, God, to an attribute, light, via a relational process.
Oh, I see.
So when you map the experiential metafunction of a whole paragraph, you can see exactly how the author is constructing reality. Are they using entirely material action verbs to show rapid historical movement? Or are they using relational and mental verbs to slow down and explore theological states of being?
That makes total sense. So the experiential track builds the world. Let's move to the second track, the interpersonal metafunction. How does this differ from just describing reality?
Well, if the experiential track is about representing the world, the interpersonal track is about acting upon the world, specifically the social world.
Because language is social.
Inherently. Language is intrinsically social. Every time we communicate, we establish a relationship with our audience. The interpersonal metafunction deals with speech functions, mood, modality, and positioning. It answers the question, who is interacting, and what is their power dynamic or relationship?
You know, we see this constantly in the epistles. An author might spend 3 chapters using declarative statements, which is an interpersonal choice of just, giving information.
Right.
But then they hit a therefore, and suddenly the verbs shift to imperatives. They start issuing commands. The interpersonal dynamic radically shifts from a teacher imparting wisdom to an authority figure demanding action.
Exactly. When Jesus says to the disciples, "Follow me," the interpersonal metafunction highlights that this is a demand for goods and services in linguistic terms. It establishes absolute authority.
Wow. Yeah.
Or consider modality, the space between yes and no. Words like might, could, must, always, never. These are interpersonal choices that show how certain or authoritative the speaker is regarding their experiential claims.
Which brings us to the third track, the textual metafunction. We have the world built. We have the social dynamics established. What does the textual metafunction actually do?
The textual metafunction is the packaging department. It is responsible for organizing the experiential and interpersonal meanings into a coherent, linear flow that the human brain can actually process.
Because we can only hold so much in our heads at once.
Right. Cognitive linguistics shows us that human working memory is highly limited. We cannot process a random string of disjointed ideas. So the textual metafunction manages the flow of information, what is given or already known to the listener, and what is new information.
Okay, I follow that.
It also manages theme and rime, which is how a clause is organized from its starting point to its destination. It basically answers the question, how is this message packaged to be understood in real time?
Okay, I buy the idea that the text is an ecosystem operating on these three tracks. But frankly, and I want to push back on this just a bit, this sounds dangerously close to reader response theory,
Oh, I see where you're going.
or at least a kind of linguistic relativism. I want to push back on the concept of an instantial system. If logogenesis means the text is creating its own rules as it unfolds, how do we keep this from just becoming subjective theological soup?
That's a fair question.
Like, does a text actually rewrite the grammatical laws of Koine Greek by the time you reach chapter 10 of a gospel?
Okay, that is a vital critique and honestly a very common misunderstanding of SFL. To be clear, no. The text absolutely does not invent new grammatical rules that violate the broader linguistic system.
Okay, good.
It does not rewrite Koine Greek. What logogenesis does is select favored motifs from the existing rules and elevate them to prominence.
Like emphasizing what's already there.
Right. Think of it like a master composer writing a symphony. They have access to every note on the piano, every possible chord progression in Western music theory. As the symphony unfolds, they don't invent new notes.
No, a G is still a G.
Exactly. But they might lean heavily into a specific minor key or favor a recurring, jagged rhythmic motif in the strings. That specific combination of existing elements becomes the unique instantial system of that symphony.
Oh, that completely clarifies it. The rules of music don't change, but the internal phase of the piece establishes its own normative patterns.
Yes.
We see this in preaching all the time, don't we? A pastor might start a sermon leaning heavily on the experiential metafunction, telling a dense historical narrative using material action verbs. David ran to the battle line, he slung the stone.
Right, pure historical mapping.
But by the application at the end of the sermon, the instantial system shifts. They pivot to the interpersonal metafunction, using second-person pronouns and imperatives. Stand firm against your giants. Trust God.
Exactly.
The grammatical laws of English didn't change, but the text's internal phase shifted from narrative to exhortation.
Precisely. The text builds a local environment of meaning. Halliday and Matheson actually illustrate this with a brilliant, mundane example. They analyze a transcript of a casual dinner table conversation among friends.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Someone serves a fish dish, and one of the guests says, "I must say this fish is cooked beautifully."
It is deeply satisfying that they use a dinner party to explain high-level linguistic instantiation.
Right. It grounds the theory in human reality. In that specific conversation, as they eat, the experiential focus locks onto relational clauses describing the fish. Mine is cold, mine is sensational, it's lovely.
Haha, right.
The interpersonal focus remains in the declarative mood. They are sharing subjective assessments to build social solidarity. And the textual focus repeatedly makes the fish the thematic point of departure. As that conversation logogenetically unfolds, the fish and its quality become the instantial system, the favored semantic motif of that conversational phase.
So, applied to biblical studies, this means when we read a text, we aren't just looking at isolated parsed words. We are watching a highly structured theological world being built, clause by clause, utilizing experiential, interpersonal, and textual tracks.
That is exactly what we are doing.
And here's the next big hurdle that brings up a massive structural problem. We've been talking about clauses, right? But a book like the Gospel of John is thousands of clauses long.
Right.
How do these metafunctions stretch across an entire chapter or an entire epistle? I mean, if I build a bunch of individual bricks, I still just have a pile of bricks, not a wall.
Yeah.
How does a text hold together without just disintegrating into a random, chaotic pile of sentences?
Well, this is where we move from the architecture of the clause to the architecture of the discourse.
Yeah.
This brings us to the cohesive toolkit.
The cohesive toolkit.
Yes. Halliday and Matheson outline 4 primary lexicogrammatical resources that create cohesion. These are the linguistic devices that reach across clause boundaries and sew the text together.
So if we run with the masonry analogy, the individual clauses are the bricks. But you can't just dump a pile of bricks on the ground and call it a cathedral.
No, you can't.
Cohesion is the mortar. It's the structural archways, the load-bearing pillars, the deliberate color coordination of the stone that turns an aggregate pile of rocks into a unified, soaring piece of architecture.
I think the masonry analogy holds up perfectly, honestly, because cohesion is structural, but it's also semantic. It creates a unified visual and logical impact.
Right.
The 4 foundational tools in our cohesive toolkit are conjunction, reference, ellipsis, which we'll group with substitution and lexical cohesion.
Hmm.
Let's dig into how each of these operates specifically within the Greek New Testament.
Okay, let's start with resource one, conjunction. And on the surface, this seems incredibly basic. We are talking about words like and, but, therefore, however.
Right.
The source material defines conjunctions as markers of logico-semantic transitions between text spans. Why is this more profound than just linking two sentences together?
Because human cognition requires logical mapping to follow an argument. Conjunctions are the street signs of discourse. And what is crucial in SFL is that conjunctions operate on two different levels.
Okay, what are they?
They can have an external orientation or an internal orientation. External conjunctions refer to real-world experiential events. If I say, I woke up and then I ate breakfast, the conjunction "and then" is external. It marks a temporal sequence in the physical world.
Okay, that makes sense.
But internal conjunctions organize the rhetorical discourse itself.
Let me test that. So if an author says, first I will argue X, second I will prove Y, finally I will conclude Z, those words, first, second, finally, aren't describing events in the physical world.
No, they aren't.
They are internal rhetorical markers guiding the reader through the logic of the text.
Precisely. And this distinction blows the doors off traditional Greek parsing, especially in the Gospel of John. The discourse analysis of John highlights the author's incredibly specific use of the Greek particle in, which English translations typically render as therefore, then, or so.
Oh, wow. Yeah, in a standard first-year Greek class, a student is taught to parse out as a simple inferential conjunction. You memorize the flashcard, you see it in the text, you translate it as therefore, and you move on to the main verb.
But when you analyze out through the lens of logogenesis and discourse cohesion, a completely different picture emerges.
How so?
In narrative chapters like John 4, with the woman at the well, or John 9, the healing of the blind man, one frequently functions as an internal enhancing conjunction. John isn't just saying this event happened next in historical time.
Okay.
He is using out as a rhetorical step, physically pushing the reader to the next phase of the theological argument or the next beat of the dramatic interaction.
It's like the linguistic equivalent of a film director yelling action on the next scene. It shifts the phase of the instantial system.
It absolutely is. Or consider the epistles, like 1 John. Look at the conjunction ina, meaning so that, or in order that.
Wait, the purpose clause.
Exactly. In 1 John 1.4, the author writes, and we are writing these things hina, so that our joy may be complete. That conjunction is not a minor connecting word.
No.
No, it serves a massive, elaborating causal role that reaches backward, grabs the entire preceding epistolary unit of verses 1 through 3, and ties it directly to the communicative purpose of the author. It is a load-bearing pillar in the masonry of the text.
Which completely changes how a pastor must treat the text. You cannot preach verse 4 in isolation from verses 1 through 3.
You really can't.
The internal cohesive logic of the hina absolutely forbids it. You'd be preaching a roof without the walls holding it up.
That's a great way to put it.
And this flows perfectly into resource 2, reference. Because conjunction connects logical ideas, but reference is all about tracking participants.
Right.
How do we know who or what we are talking about as the text moves forward?
Right. So Halliday and Mathieson categorize reference into two main domains, exaphoric and endophoric.
Exaphoric meaning outside.
Yes. Exaphoric reference points outside the text to the shared physical environment. If we were sitting in a room and I say, look at that book, I am relying on our shared physical space for you to understand the reference.
Got it.
But written texts rely primarily on endophoric reference, which points inside the text itself. Endophoric reference can be anaphoric, pointing backward to a participant already introduced, or cataphoric, pointing forward to something that is about to be introduced.
Let's ground this in the Greek text. We see this brilliantly executed in the famous opening of John's Gospel, John 1.1-2. Verse 1 introduces the primary participant, the overarching theme of the entire book. Haloo-tus, meaning the word.
The central figure.
Then immediately, verse 2 begins with the demonstrative pronoun ho-tus, meaning this one.
Yes. And if we analyze that through the textual metafunction and cohesive theory, ho-tus is acting as a powerful anaphoric reference.
Pointing backward.
Pointing backward. Reaches back across the clause boundary, grabs the semantic identity of hobotos from verse 1, and carries it forward into verse 2. It creates a referential chain.
To keep it front and center.
Exactly. This ensures that the logos maintains its status as the thematic point of departure. The text refuses to let you lose sight of the primary subject.
And the epistles use this for profound theological comparison, too. I mean, look at 1 John 2.6, where the author uses the distal demonstrative ekanos, meaning that one, referring to Jesus. Whoever claims to live in him must live as ekanos did.
That's fascinating.
Because in standard Greek, a distal demonstrative points to something far away in space or time. But here, the text is using it to establish Jesus as an anaphoric comparative frame.
It is a stunning use of reference.
Yeah.
The author isn't saying Jesus is far away. He is using the cohesive marker to set Jesus up as the ultimate benchmark. The believer's daily experiential conduct is entirely measured against the referential anchor of that one. Jesus becomes the cohesive anchor for Christian ethics within the structure of the text itself.
That's amazing. Now, speaking of how a text connects its ideas, what happens when an author just stops talking?
Yeah.
Or deliberately leaves a hole in the sentence?
Right.
Because this brings us to resource 3, ellipsis and substitution. And I think this is one of the most dramatic and psychologically impactful tools in the entire cohesive toolkit. Ellipsis is the strategic omission of continuous information. It is the linguistic equivalent of a dramatic pause.
It really is. Cognitive linguistics tells us that the human brain is an anticipation machine. When we read or listen, we expect certain syntactic structures to be completed.
We want the sentence finished.
Exactly. And when an author uses ellipsis, they intentionally break that expectation. They leave out the expected continuous words. And the psychological result is that whatever is left standing gets a massive blinding spotlight shining on it.
It creates focus.
Massive focus. It gives maximum prominence to contrastive or new information. The discourse analysis document provides an incredible example of this from John 9.
The healing of the man born blind. This is such a masterclass in discourse. Walk us through the mechanics of the ellipsis here.
So, Jesus finds the man after he's been cast out of the synagogue by the religious leaders. Jesus approaches him and asks a direct interpersonal question. Do you believe in the Son of Man?
Right.
Now watch the Greek syntax of the formerly blind man's reply. He says, Kaitis es ten, kairi, hina pistiuso is otin. Translated literally. And who is he, Lord, that I may believe in him?
I want to pause and look closely at what is missing there, because the structural void is the whole point. In a normal, full conversational reply, you would expect him to reiterate the main verbal group related to believing from the opening clause.
Right, you'd expect a full sentence.
You would expect him to say, I want to believe, but who is he? Or, I would believe if you tell me who he is. But he doesn't. He strips away all the continuous information presupposed by Jesus' question, and he zeroes in entirely on the open interrogative pronoun, tautus, who.
The ellipsis is deafening. By completely omitting the verb of his own volition, the grammar itself isolates the single missing piece of information required to complete his faith commitment. The structural void in his sentence perfectly mirrors the void in his theological knowledge. He is completely unreservedly ready to believe. He just needs the target.
That completely flips the script on how we read that interaction. Instead of the grammar just passively carrying the historical facts of a conversation, the syntax is actively engineering the theology of the narrative.
It's brilliant.
The omission of the verb is the ultimate expression of his faith. That is absolute exegetical gold for a sermon.
It proves that you cannot separate the grammar from the theology. The grammar is theology.
Yeah.
And this brings us to the final tool, resource 4, lexical cohesion. We've looked at conjunctions, references, and omissions. Lexical cohesion is how a text builds texture over long passages through vocabulary, specifically through repetition, synonymy, and antonymy.
And this is where we have to talk about 1 John. Because if you sit down and read 1 John in Greek, or honestly, even in a good English translation, it can feel incredibly repetitive.
Very repetitive.
It can feel almost rudimentary. It repeats the same words so often it almost sounds like a children's book. God is light. In him there is no darkness. If we walk in the light as he is in the light, we have fellowship. But if we walk in darkness, it just endlessly cycles back and forth.
It does. And to a modern reader trained in classical rhetoric, it does feel circular, maybe even overly simplistic.
Right.
But when we look through the lens of SFL and lexical cohesion, we have to completely reframe our critique of John's style. The author is not being simplistic. He is making a highly sophisticated, deliberate stylistic choice to avoid complex syntactic subordination.
Explain that difference for us. What do you mean by avoiding syntactic subordination?
Well, think about how the Apostle Paul writes. Paul loves the textual metafunction. He builds massive, convoluted, highly subordinated sentences.
Oh, yeah. Ephesians 1 is basically one long run-on sentence in Greek.
Exactly. He uses although, because, less, so that, stacking clauses inside of clauses until you have this sprawling theological paragraph. Paul builds a complex architectural blueprint.
But John doesn't do that.
No, John doesn't do that at all. John uses very simple paratactic clauses, short sentences linked by and. But to hold his theological argument together, John builds a tight polar ideological structure using intersecting lexical chains.
Ah, the antonymic chains. This is brilliant.
Yeah.
In 1 John 1.5 through 2.11, you have chain A, which is the domain of God. It is constructed entirely of lexical cohesion, linking light, truth, and love, phos, aletheia, agapho.
Yes.
And pitted directly against it, structurally mirroring it, is chain B, the domain of the world. It links darkness, lie, and hate. Skeistos, esodus, mieso.
And this raises a profound point for biblical scholars regarding how different authors construct meaning. John's theology isn't carried by complex hypothetical clauses. It is carried by the cohesive collision of these two lexical chains.
You're in one or the other.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You are either participating in the chain of light or you are trapped in the chain of darkness. There is no middle ground, and the grammar allows for no middle ground. The lexical cohesion is the theological reality.
Okay, we have thoroughly mapped out the SFL framework. We have established that text is a living process of logogenesis. We have examined how the three metafunctions map reality, and we have unpacked the cohesive toolkit that binds the clauses into a unified discourse.
We've covered a lot.
We have. But now we must cross the bridge. We need to introduce the second major framework from our source material, Constantine R. Campbell's theory of verbal aspect. How do we take this high-level functional linguistics and merge it with the nitty-gritty morphology of Greek verbs?
This is where the synthesis becomes incredibly powerful for exegesis. For a very long time, students of Koine Greek were taught a tense-based model of verbs. We were taught that the tense of a verb primarily indicated time past, present, or future.
Right, I remember that. The aorist was the past tense, the present was the present tense, and so on.
Exactly. But modern linguists, heavily influenced by cognitive grammar and scholars like Campbell, argue that Greek tense forms primarily grammaticalize aspect, not time.
I want to slow down here and define aspect, because this is the hinge upon which modern Greek exegesis turns. If it's not about when the action happened on a timeline, what is it?
Aspect is an uncancelable semantic feature that expresses the speaker's subjective viewpoint of an action. Time is objective. It happened yesterday. Aspect is subjective. It is how the author chooses to portray the event to the reader.
Okay, subjective viewpoint.
Right. And to explain this, Campbell uses a brilliant spatial metaphor that makes the cognitive linguistics incredibly accessible. He calls it the zoom-in, zoom-out model.
I love this model, and it makes sense, right? Why do human brains need spatial metaphors to understand time and action? Cognitive linguists like George Lakoff point out that humans can't easily conceptualize abstract ideas like time without mapping them onto physical space.
We do it all the time.
Yeah, we say things like the weekend is approaching or we're moving toward the holidays. Campbell is taking that cognitive reality and applying it to Greek verbs. Walk us through how his spatial metaphor categorizes the aspects.
Sure. We use space to understand action. So Campbell breaks down the three main aspects. First, you have perfective aspect, which is typically realized by the aorist tense form.
Okay, aorist is perfective.
Right. Campbell describes perfective aspect as an external, zoomed-out view of an action. It presents an event in summary as a complete whole from beginning to end without focusing on the internal process or duration.
So, to use a physical analogy, think of a drone shot looking down at a massive parade from 5,000 feet up in the air.
That's a great image.
From that zoomed-out perspective, you don't see individual marching bands or floats. You just see a single, continuous line stretching from start to finish. You see the whole parade as a single, complete event. That is the aorist. It is perfective, zoomed out, summary view.
That is a perfect visualization. Now, contrast that with the second category, imperfective aspect, which is typically realized by the present and imperfect tense forms.
Oh.
Imperfective aspect is the zoomed-in view. It is an internal perspective that views the action as an unfolding process from within the action itself without any regard to its beginning or its end.
So, using the parade analogy again, you took the drone, landed it right in the middle of Main Street, and now you are walking alongside the marching band.
Exactly.
You are surrounded by the music and the movement. You don't know when the parade started, and you can't see the finish line. You are just in the ongoing flow of the action. That is the present or imperfect tense. Imperfective. zoomed in, unfolding process.
Spot on. But here is where Campbell's model brings a game-changing, paradigm-shifting insight to discourse analysis. We have the era zoomed out and the present or imperfect zoomed in.
Right.
But what about the perfect and pluperfect tense forms? Historically, these have been notoriously difficult to nail down.
They always trip students up.
Always. Campbell argues that the perfect tense form conveys imperfective aspect, so it's fundamentally zoomed in, but it combines that imperfective aspect with a stative feature.
A stative feature, meaning it doesn't just describe an ongoing action, it describes a state of affairs, a condition that exists as a reality.
Right. And because the perfect tense combines a zoomed-in internal perspective with a state of being, Campbell demonstrates that it acts as a primary device for discourse prominence.
Oh, wow. It's like a highlighter marker for the text.
Precisely. Authors don't just use the perfect tense to mix up their vocabulary, they use it for fronting, for heightened visibility, or to mark the thematic climax of a discourse.
That is huge.
It is. When an author shifts from the aorist backbone to a perfect verb, they are telling the reader, pay attention to the abiding reality of this state.
Okay, this is where the theoretical rubber meets the exegetical road. Let's take SFL's concept of logogenesis, the unfolding creation of a textual world, and merge it with Campbell's verbal aspect.
Let's do it.
And let's apply it to one of the most famous, philosophically dense passages in the entire biblical canon, the prologue of the Gospel of John, John 1:1 to 14. I want to see the experiential metafunction and the verbal aspect operating together.
Okay, let's track the text. In verses 1 and 2, John writes, "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God." In those opening verses, John relies entirely on relational intensive clauses. And experientially, the verb he selects and repeats is the imperfect verb ayn, was.
And if we apply Campbell's model, the imperfect ayn conveys imperfective aspect. It is zoomed in.
Right.
It is viewing the state of the logos as an unfolding, ongoing reality without beginning or end. John is using the linguistic architecture to construct the uncreated, eternal, ontological state of the word. You're standing in eternity watching the abiding relationship between God and the Word.
Exactly. The grammar builds an eternal reality. But then look at the logogenetic shift that happens in verse 3 regarding creation, verse 6 regarding John the Baptist, and especially the climactic verse 14, and the Word became flesh.
What happens there?
The text suddenly shifts experientially. It moves away from relational clauses and adopts material transformative clauses. And especially the verb shifts from the imperfect to the aorist verb, ageh netto, became or came into being.
And the aorist, ageh netto, conveys perfective aspect. It is zoomed out. It views the action as a complete summary event.
Yes. So if we pull back and look at the whole discourse, the logogenetic transition from the imperfective state, the ayn, to the perfective event, the ageh netto, is how the grammar explicitly signals the text's movement.
Oh, I see it.
The text itself moves from a timeless, ontological, eternal reality into the finite, historical, space-time narrative of the incarnation.
That is staggeringly beautiful. The Greek isn't just a passive vehicle carrying the theological cargo. The grammar is actively engineering the theology.
Really is.
John is using the shift in verbal aspect to literally bring the eternal word down into the summary, perfective reality of human history.
It is a stunning display of discourse mastery, and it completely proves why we cannot just parse verbs in isolation. If you sit in the classroom and just define ayn as past tense was and ageh as past tense became, you completely flatten the theological architecture of the prologue. You lose the incarnation in the grammar.
Which brings us to the most important part of this deep dive, the pulpit and study payoff. Because as fascinating as cognitive linguistics and verbal aspect are, I know there is a pastor listening right now who has to prepare a sermon.
Naturally.
They are thinking, okay, logogenesis and SFL are brilliant, but how does this abstract linguistic architecture actually change how I outline a text or preach on Sunday morning? Because if linguistics doesn't serve exegesis, it's just academic trivia.
That is the ultimate test.
Yeah.
Knowledge is most valuable when it is applied to the text in service of the church. So let's provide a concrete, applied discourse mapping. Let's look at the text score of the opening of 1 John 1:1 to 4.
Oh, man. This is arguably one of the most notoriously difficult Greek sentences in the New Testament.
It's a monster.
It starts, "That which was from the beginning, which we have heard, which we have seen with our eyes, which we looked upon and have touched with our hands concerning the word of life." It is essentially one massive, structurally complex, 4-verse-long relative clause complex. You have to read for a long time before you finally hit the main verb. It's a grammatical suspension bridge.
It is incredibly dense. But if we map it using Halliday's metafunctions and Campbell's aspectual theory, the architecture reveals exactly how it should be preached.
Okay, show me.
First, look at the aorist verbs in that opening section. We have the verbs for beholding and touching, ethia esmitha, and ipse eliashvisan.
Okay, applying the model. Aorist means perfective aspect. It is the drone shot, zoomed out, summary view of an event.
Yes. These aorists provide the perfective summary backbone of the paragraph.
Right.
They're the concrete historical actions.
Right.
John is stating that the apostles literally, historically beheld and physically touched the incarnate Jesus. That perfective aspect establishes the historical baseline. It happened.
But John doesn't stop there. Interspersed tightly with those historical aorists, you have a second set of verbs, the perfect verbs. You have the verbs for hearing and seeing, akek, oh amen, and hek, oh rah amen.
And here is the crucial exegetical insight from Campbell's state of theory. The perfect tense combines imperfective aspect with the state of feature. It is a state of being that is zoomed in.
Okay.
By selecting the perfect tense alongside the aorists, John is creating high discourse prominence. He didn't just mix aorists and perfects for stylistic variety or to avoid repeating himself. He is taking the zoomed-in, ongoing state of their sensory experience and fronting it. He's elevating the abiding sensory state of apostolic eyewitness testimony here to maximum prominence.
Wow, the sermon outline application here is absolute dynamite.
It dictates the whole passage.
It dictates the entire theological thrust of the message. You cannot preach 1 John 1 as a simple historical recounting. You can't just stand in the pulpit and say, the apostles saw Jesus a long time ago, as if it's just a historical fact. If you do that, you are preaching the text as if all the verbs were aorists. You are flattening the prominence.
Exactly. You must preach it with the theological weight and the architectural contour that John intended.
Yes.
The historical actions, the aorist verbs, ground the authority. Yes, it really happened in history. But the ongoing, abiding reality of the eyewitnesses, the perfect verbs, that is the theological climax. It is an abiding state of witness that drives the sentence forward until it finally culminates in the present tense, imperfective main verb in verse 3. Upon GLO men we proclaim.
The historical reality of the aorist grounds the abiding authority, the perfect, which empowers the present unfolding proclamation, the present, that preaches. The linguistic structure is the sermon outline.
It really is.
And the textual metafunction supports this massive buildup too, doesn't it? Because John keeps repeating the relative pronoun ho, that which, over and over. That which was from the beginning, that which we have heard, that which we have seen.
Yes, that is a textbook example of cohesive thematic fronting. He takes the relative pronoun, makes it the theme of each consecutive clause, and suspends the grammatical tension across 4 complex clauses.
It's like a rubber band stretching.
Exactly. He is winding the rhetorical spring tighter and tighter, holding the listener in a state of suspended anticipation until the delayed main verb, opan gel lomen, finally releases the tension and resolves the rhetorical arc.
It's a linguistic crescendo. And if a pastor understands that architecture, they can structure their sermon delivery to mimic that exact same crescendo.
Precisely.
You build the tension of the historical, undeniable, abiding witness, and then you release it in the proclamation of fellowship. You mirror the text's logogenesis in your own preaching.
And this is exactly why advanced discourse analysis is so vital for the scholar and the pastor. It rescues the text from being a dead specimen on an autopsy table.
Yeah.
When you see the logogenesis unfolding, when you trace the cohesive chains binding the clauses, when you understand the cognitive interplay of perfective and imperfective aspect, the text breathes. You realize that every single grammatical choice is a profound theological choice.
We have covered a massive amount of conceptual ground today.
We really have.
We started by completely redefining text not as an object, but as a living process of instantiation. We explored how the 3 metafunctions, experiential, interpersonal, and textual, cognitively map reality, social dynamics, and information flow.
Right.
We opened up the cohesive toolkit, looking at how internal conjunctions like own and hina, endophoric reference chains, structural ellipsis, and antonymic lexical chains sew the Gospel and epistles of John together into an unbreakable theological unit.
And we bridged that systemic functional linguistic theory with Campbell's spatial cognitive model of verbal aspect.
Yeah, the spatial metaphor.
We saw how the shift from imperfective to perfective aspect in the prologue of John literally tracks the theology of the incarnation, and how the stative prominence of the perfect tense in 1 John 1 highlights the abiding, unshakable authority of the apostolic witness.
We have shifted our perspective from looking at the Greek text as a static object to reading it as a living, breathing artifact of meaning.
But, this synthesis raises a deeply provocative question, and it's something I want to leave you, the listener, to mull over in your own study this week.
Lay it on us.
We have just demonstrated that John's entire theological framework relies on intricate lexical chains and highly specific aspectual shifts, like the discourse prominence of the perfect tense over the aorist. But what happens when our modern English translations are forced to flatten those perfects and aorists into simple past tenses?
Oh, wow. That is the uncomfortable reality of translation. English simply does not have the morphological machinery to translate Greek aspect perfectly. We rely heavily on time-based tense.
We do. And so, as an exegete, as someone tasked with handling this text for a congregation, you have to ask yourself, how much discourse prominence are you and your congregation missing by only reading the English?
That's a challenging thought.
When the translation smooths over the cohesive mortar and flattens the aspectual relief map, what profound theological nuances are slipping through the cracks?
It brings us right back to our starting point. You cannot just look at the parsed words in a jar. You have to watch the living text in motion. The grammar isn't just the bones of the text, it is the heartbeat.
Indeed. There is always more to learn from the text when we let it speak on its own terms, through its own linguistic architecture.
Well said. To everyone listening, thank you for joining us on this deep dive. May your exegesis this week be rigorous, and may your texts come alive.